In the coming days, MSPs will meet in the Scottish Parliament for the final vote on whether assisted suicide should be allowed in Scotland for the first time. The Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland Bill is one of the most consequential pieces of legislation to come before the Parliament in recent times. While it's often presented as compassionate, the reality is that there are considerable risks and few protections bolted onto this bill. Many argue that it's unsafe, particularly for the vulnerable, the disabled, and those who are at risk of coercion. It also fundamentally alters the human perspective of life and death. Research shows that when people understand the details and the serious shortcomings of this bill, the more they reject it. The more they know, the more they say no. In this video, we look closely at the risks and deep concerns surrounding this particular bill and the consequences for all of us if it were to become law.
Today's debate about assisted dying often comes packaged in the way of many things these days, centered around human rights. So, do I have the right to take my own life? But you know, behind the notion of human rights is a much deeper notion of human dignity. Rights are bestowed on somebody by a law. Dignity is innate within the human person. Dignity can only be recognized or ignored, but it's not in the gift of a government or a state to grant dignity to somebody. So when we go through the issues to do with assisted dying or assisted suicide, we've got to keep a firm grasp on the notion of dignity given to a person by a creator, and then that's how we live.
What is the reasons that people are seeking assisted suicide or euthanasia? Because the way this is sold is that people are dying painful deaths and this is just about being compassionate and allowing people not to have a painful death. But actually, when you look at the statistics, we find that the real reasons that people are seeking this has got very little to do with pain or even fear of pain.
There's one view that says compassion is just allowing someone to die, to end it all. If their suffering is too great, to end it all for them, to end it all for us. But we think that's the wrong idea of compassion, because compassion literally means to suffer with, to carry the cross with another person. And so we would say the humane understanding of compassion is to bear someone's suffering if they're old, they're elderly, they're sick, they're dying, to be with them, to accompany them right to the very end.
Nobody knows what day is going to be your last day. It could be the last day for any of us, but we know that every day until that last day can be good when people are given proper palliative care.
One of the most grave concerns people have about this bill, despite its proposed safeguards, is that it will harm already vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, especially the disabled. Could it be that an assisted dying culture quickly turns the right to die into an obligation to die?
There's an awful lot of people who are not as articulate, not as empowered in their lives, people, whether they be disabled, whether they just be people who are poor, whether they be people who are elderly or living alone. These are the vulnerable people who will be put at risk from this legislation.
People who are receiving care are often vulnerable to feeling that they're a burden. It's an understandable reaction, but it does make people more vulnerable.
The groups who become most vulnerable, of course, are disabled people, which is why so many disabled people throughout the United Kingdom, people like my good friend Baroness Tanni Gray-Thompson, the Paralympic athlete, people like Liz Carr, the actor, people like Baroness Jane Campbell, who speaks in Parliament through an oxygen mask. The reason why they are also passionately opposed to this change is they say it'll be people like them who'll be told their lives aren't worth living and they would be better off dead. We don't want to live in that kind of country.
What we have seen in the hospice community is that many people might have a transient suicidal thought, perhaps a thought that they just can't go on, or they can't cope, they can't manage, or that it's a burden on their family and friends and they don't want that. But what we have found is that many people change their minds, and there is a period of adjustment, and they come to terms with the new reality, the new way that they can live. It's not always easy, but it's a different way, and that we can support them at that time rather than giving them the means to take their own life.
For many people, the most compelling argument opposing assisted suicide is found in the experience of other places. Assisted dying and assisted suicide have been legal in several countries and jurisdictions around the world, and in each place, strict laws governing the practice have eased over time. And so there's a real concern that the strict conditions and safeguards assured in the UK bill will erode in the same way, leading to a kind of slippery slope and a huge widening of scenarios where assisted dying could be requested. The continuous liberalisation of assisted dying in other places forecasts what's likely to take place here, and this is a huge concern to many.
One of my biggest misgivings about this legislation throughout is that safeguards don't work. You only have to see what's happened in Holland and Belgium and Canada and other jurisdictions that have introduced these changes. The safeguards are not worth the paper on which they're written.
Hugely concerned about developments, for example, in Canada, where we found that what was proposed as a tightly drawn bill, as this is suggested to be, has actually been extended really quickly.
So the thing about assisted suicide or euthanasia is that the numbers really depend on how permissive the legislation is. So if you take Canada, for example, which passed the law in 2016, very quickly the numbers increased. So you have about 1,000 in the first 6 months. Last year it was probably over 15,000 people who had what they call a medically assisted in dying death, which is mainly euthanasia. 99.9% of them are euthanasia deaths.
Now, originally the law said that you had to have a type of a terminal illness. Now, it didn't define it. It said that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. But then in 2021, the government struck that out of the law. And so what was remaining after that, so since 2021, March of 2021, what has remained in the law is you need to have an irremediable medical condition, because the terminal illness requirement was removed.
And what we see in other countries, say in Oregon, over half of the people who are asking to have their life ended, they cite as one of the reasons that they don't want to be a burden to others.
Oregon, the numbers are a lot smaller, but then the population is smaller. It's an assisted suicide regime. But even there, the numbers have gone up year on year.
So things started to explode very quickly. So for instance, we had the case in Toronto of a 23-year-old young man, and he had diabetes. So he was insulin-dependent diabetic, and he wanted euthanasia. He was quite depressed. He was approved. There's a euthanasia clinic in Toronto that had approved him, that he was going to die. And his mother, her name is Margaret, she was very upset about this. She could not believe that her son, who was 23 and otherwise healthy, was approved to be killed by euthanasia.
Is what you vote for what you get? Or do you get more than you ask for? And what you see throughout the world is in every jurisdiction which has had this for more than 5 years, so it's had a bit of time, there is some expansion. There is some expansion in eligibility, there is some expansion to different groups, there's always expansion in numbers, but also it's not just the rules, the law, it's also how you apply the law. So if you take somewhere like Oregon, the law still says in Oregon that you have to be terminally ill and you have to have a 6 months wait. But we now know that in 2021, that was used for someone who had anorexia. in Belgium and in the Netherlands and in Colombia, it's extended from adults to children. That in Canada and in Colombia, it's extended from foreseeable death to chronic illnesses. In Oregon and Vermont, it's changed from residents only to non-residents.
Many opponents of this bill are deeply concerned about its impact on already stretched and underfunded palliative care services. They feel greater support should be given to health and social care and hospice provision so that we can accompany those in the final chapter of their life with high-quality palliative services marked by compassion and love and care.
Palliative care is a really good model of care. So it is a real attempt to look after people who are terminally ill. So in the last maybe year to 18 months of their life.
So for the patient, it is proper treatment, alleviation of symptoms, whatever they are, not just necessarily medication. It can be counselling, it can be spiritual support. So identifying their needs and dealing with them as possibly and as quickly and as competently as you can.
Although John was a wee bit wary about coming in for, as he said, palliative care, which he decided was end-of-life care, he, within 3-4 days, you'd have thought he'd been here for ages. And he was a bit of a joker at times, and he had the nurses telling jokes, and, you know, he felt so much at ease.
We're doing end-of-life care, so we're dealing with symptoms, whether medical, physical, psychological, spiritual, and trying to alleviate any whichever symptom it is. Yes, the end result is to give the person a good death, but the primary intention is to alleviate their symptoms, not to purposely kill them.
So the situation is that the model is a really good model of care, but the difficulty is that not everyone has access to that care.
But there's a much wider need for general palliative care advice out in the community, and the majority of people, certainly over half, will die at home, but there's no reason why there couldn't be good quality palliative care by district nurses, GPs, practice teams, and with support from consultants if required.
If we had the correct funding, we could provide our services to everybody living with a life-limiting illness, but unfortunately the government are not yet funding palliative care services the way they should.
We know that palliative care is a hugely important part, not often recognised, of this debate. And we know that skillfully used palliative care eases the burden of suffering enormously. I saw that for myself.
We're hugely concerned that it is actually the lack of care that is maybe driving people to this.
Well, nobody was going to lift a finger to help me to die. What they would do would be work with the best of intentions. That's intentions driven by a sense of love and affection for the person, to be as comfortable, as easy as possible.
The hospice is like an extended family. The care, the consideration, just the human side of everything.
We need the hospices, we need them, and we need inpatient bed services, but it's how can we provide a complementary community service.
And my fear is that if we go down this road of assisted suicide, which is a cheaper option, then there will be less investment in palliative care, and that would be a great pity indeed.
It's clear that assisted dying is a highly divisive moral issue. Adopting a new law which would allow an individual to be helped to effectively commit suicide changes everything. It changes the role of doctors who have pledged to do no harm. It rewrites the very idea of healthcare, and it disturbs the moral foundations on which society is built. As human beings, we rely on each other to do no harm and to respect the unique dignity of every human person. This has always included supporting each other in the journey from life to natural death. Is this the moment when all this changes forever, for ourselves, for our children and our grandchildren.
You might open the door, but then somebody else is going to open it wider. You don't have control of what happens in 10 years' time. You don't have control of that. It's other people who have control of that. You have control now about whether we start down this line. But this line, this is a train that goes all the way to the station. Once you get on this train, it's going to go, you're not going to be talking about small changes. You're going to be talking about what's happening in Canada or what's happening in the Netherlands or Belgium. Look at where the train goes, not just where we start. And that's something that really politicians need to take responsibility for what will happen, what is likely to happen in the future. And we can see it, it's not just speculative, we can see it in other countries.
One of my biggest misgivings about this legislation throughout is that safeguards don't work. You only have to see what's happened in Holland and Belgium and Canada and other jurisdictions that have introduced these changes.
We should be careful what we wish for, because even though this bill will be framed with considerable safeguards, we know from around the world where other nations have enacted this kind of legal right to die, that it's expanded. Those safeguards slip away, and all sorts of reasons are used in other countries why a person may take up the right to die, because they're in a very profound depression, because even they're struggling with anorexia. There are all sorts of accounts which are very disturbing. So please do take some action and write to your MPs, engage in debate, engage with people.
If you care about the impact on people who are already facing discrimination, raise your voice.
The slippery slope argument is real. Check the facts, look at all the statistics, and raise your voice.
Doing nothing never ever changed anything. All that's required for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Raise your voice for the vulnerable. Write to your Member of Parliament and urge them to vote against this legislation.
The bill, which is becoming before Parliament shortly, says it has lots of protection, but experience shows that those protections slip by. I would oppose this bill. Just be very careful what you wish for. And now, please, raise your voice.